for me, I don't think learning has ever been more accessible than it is right now at this period in time. And what I mean by that is post-pandemic. I think as long as we don't switch off a lot of the really good things we did to enable online learning during the pandemic, we've got a wider set of tools at our disposal to offer up learning in a range of really exciting ways that support everyone. And for me, accessibility is mostly about choice. It's giving people choice about the way that they access their learning in the way that suits them best. Not necessarily because they have an accessibility requirement, but just because of, I mean, we've heard today already about, some people because of tube strikes have come in a different way. Some people have caring commitments. So this is just about good inclusive practice and bringing everyone along with us. I think in particular, the awful pandemic brought out some genuinely positive improvements. If you can think of lecture recordings, the idea of live streaming, the online chat that we've all been using today, I think is great for kind of getting ideas out as they come and generating discussion. But that has particular benefits for students who perhaps experience levels of anxiety and maybe wouldn't speak up in a seminar or a lecture, but it gives them an opportunity to be heard and in a different way. And I think my biggest fear is that we go galloping back to, well, let's just do it all the way we did before the pandemic and lose all of this lovely opportunity that we have before us. I could go on. Obviously captioning is a huge thing. And if you record something, whether, you're delivering it in a live streaming capacity and then you record it, but anything electronic has the potential to be accessible. And I think because that gives people access to it in their own terms, possibly on their own technology, where they can adapt it, reformat it and serve it up in the way that suits them best. And also some of the pressures off, because people don't have to always follow everything in real time. If you have slower levels of processing, the idea that you can attend the lecture either in real time or physically or virtually, but you've got the backup, safety blanket of coming home and being able to pause it and listen again. Rich, who's on the call today, I've seen just before I went, I've just come back from a week's holiday, but just before I went, the last meeting I had was with some of Rich's colleagues who he supports in earth sciences, and we were talking about using these amazing 3D models they have for geological surveying as a way to support people to attend field trips virtually. So I think this is all about just expanding the options available to us. And we got all very excited about, obviously, the accessibility benefits of that. And could we render these in tactile ways that would support people with low vision? Of course, there's a physical accessibility dimension to that. But then we got thinking, well, why don't we look at kind of some sort of massive open online course in this area and FutureLearn, because then that suddenly opens up this whole domain to everyone who potentially couldn't take the time to disappear up a mountain for a week. Disabled Students UK is an organisation that is headed by an ex-UCL student. And they did a very interesting survey a few months ago. It launched, and it's called Going Back is Not a Choice. And it tries to highlight the major benefits to students with accessibility requirements that have come about through the pandemic. They noted that 85% of disabled students said that they would benefit from having the option of online learning for some or all of their teaching going forward. So we're not saying, oh, it all has to be online. This is absolutely about having that mix, and giving people the choice. If you want to physically attend, brilliant. If that's the way you learn best, then knock yourself out. But don't switch that off and assume that everybody learns in that way, because we've done a lot of learning and we've realized that there's some great potential for students with disabilities to be supported in ways that perhaps they have long asked for, but hadn't been able to realize quite as quickly as we did during the movement we saw with the move to online learning. Oh, gosh, I'm running out of time. I want to give you a couple of little stories from students that I've worked with. Visually impaired student doing chemistry. Now, he actually liked to physically attend the lecture, but the main problem there was that he he couldn't see that you know, things being projected on the board in the lecture theatre that was kind of 20 feet up in the air in front of him. So the idea of, even though he was physically there, having the option to have live streaming meant that he could access the content from the lecture on his own laptop. And his vision was such that he could see it, but he had to kind of more or less press his face up to the monitor to be able to see stuff. But when we figured this out and we ran this for him, this is his feedback. Today was just so exciting. No other words for it. Thank you so much to you all. I'm still in shock from it, from this leap forward in my educational history. For the first time, I can actually read the screen during a lecture. And that sounds like a really humble kind of ambition, but it meant everything to him, because he was talking about here about the, you know, his whole educational experience. It was the first time he'd been able to kind of actually keep up and be in the same learning space as everyone else. Another quick one, another visually impaired student, this time talking about library resources. I recognise the value of digital accessibility and resources. I had a massive number of resources available to me. Literally any book that I'd had on my reading list, I got digitally. Any paper that I needed, I received in time. It was all made in a format that I required. And for the first time, I felt like I could just enjoy university life and have the same student experience, go to my lectures, attend my seminars, write my essays. One more. After my degree at Oxford, I went to, name of university extracted, to pursue a master's degree. I chose to study part-time due to a health condition, but because of scheduling, I ended up spending 3 days a week on campus. This included some really long days, which completely exhausted me, forcing me to spend days recovering afterwards. I asked to be able to access one of my lectures via recordings for my health, but despite the lecturer being happy, there was resistance among administrative staff. It took many months before recordings were finally approved, and by that time the module had finished, forcing me to go on campus so often had exhausted me to the point of worsening my condition. I had no choice but to leave my degree. A couple of months later, the pandemic hit, and suddenly everyone was accessing their education online. Since the shift online, I feel hopeful about my future in education and employment in a way that I didn't before. I hope that in the future, disabled community will look back at the experience of improved access to education, not as a temporary fluke, but as a standard. I think that's a pretty powerful message, and you just saw how, you know, the kind of cut off of
apologies, 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. And being able to be involved and continue, it's as stark a reality as that. I think there's some other really lovely things that have come out of this, and I think this is about a kind of more compassionate approach. Some of the ways that we've relaxed some of the parameters of learning, and assessment in particular, you know, it almost feels like we're being more trusting, or we've opened that conversation around being more trusting around mitigating circumstances, you know, open book exams. And I think that's a really powerful movement going forward, and I'd hate to see us dial back on that one as well. And finally, if we do roll back and say, right, yeah, it was good while it lasted, but let's switch back to the kind of mainly physical modes of learning, what message does that send? There's definitely a feeling amongst disabled students that I've spoken to, and in the Disabled Students UK report, that they have been requesting online learning lecture recordings for many years, and suddenly during the pandemic, when non-disabled people benefit from it, suddenly it's all okay. So if we now switch all of that off when they are potentially some of the primary beneficiaries of it, what are we saying there? And hopefully, I think today we've already demonstrated that it's not just people with accessibility requirements who benefit, it's everybody. And I think the learning that we've done and the distance that we've traveled has showed that we can do this, and we can expand even further, and giving people this choice gives them accessibility, and it gives them the access to learning in their own way that means they can realize their potential. And isn't that what we all get out of bed for in the morning?